Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the absolutely fascinating strategic, educational, and economic decisions that transformed a brand new, resource-starved nation into an absolute global powerhouse. We're going to dig into the exact mechanics, everything from clever battlefield psychology to some highly effective venture capitalism that allowed a tiny country to completely defy the odds.
Okay, let's jump right in with a starting point that is just staggering. Back in 1948, this nation was so severely resource-deprived that its citizens were actually limited to just 10 liters of water per person per day. Imagine that for a second. 10 liters. If you looked at this place back then, you'd have thought it would be an absolute miracle if they simply survived as a developing, impoverished state.
So to understand how they went from that strict daily water limit to becoming the 8th most powerful nation in the world today, we're going to hit 5 key areas. Against all odds, surviving through strategy, education as an engine, the Yozma Fund masterstroke, and finally, crucial lessons for India.
Let's start with part 1, against all odds.
You have to realize that their starting point was defined by a complete absence of any traditional geopolitical leverage. Think about what they didn't have. They didn't have a massive labor force like India or China. They didn't have the vast oil wealth of their neighbors in the Middle East. They literally had virtually no natural resources and barely enough drinking water. They were starting from well below zero.
And the metrics from 1948 compared to today, it's honestly an almost impossible contrast. We're talking about going from surviving on basic international aid to being globally recognized as the startup nation. From fighting with scavenged, outdated weapons all the way to becoming a top-tier military exporter that powers the defense systems of major global players. And from rationing that 10 liters of water to pioneering a $6.2 billion global drip irrigation industry. It's wild.
That brings us to Section 2, surviving through strategy.
So independence was immediately followed by a serious trial by fire. On May 14, 1948, the nation declared independence. Literally the very next day, they faced a simultaneous, multi-front conflict from 5 different armies. They managed to survive this, and later, by 1967, they shifted to using pure intelligence to launch preemptive strikes. They were bombing enemy airfields while the opposing pilots were still sitting down eating breakfast.
But how do you fight early on when you run out of actual functioning weapons? Well, you hack the mind. Take this mortar, known as the Davidka. Technically speaking, it was incredibly inaccurate, essentially useless for precision combat. But it had one unbelievable feature. It was deafeningly loud. When it fired, it made such a terrifying, massive noise that opposing armies thought they were being hit by devastating, super advanced weaponry, which just caused mass panic.
And it gets even crazier. They actually collected empty glass seltzer bottles, the ones used for sparkling water, loaded them up into these tiny crop duster planes, and just dropped them over enemy territory. As the glass bottles fell through the air, they created this high-pitched whistling sound that perfectly simulated the terrifying noise of falling aerial bombs. They were weaponizing sparkling water long before it was trendy. It triggered absolute panic without a single explosive actually being dropped. Pure, brilliant psychological maneuver. And this strategy of total deception extended right into their intelligence operations. Consider Mossad operative Eli Cohen. He managed to infiltrate top-level foreign leadership by posing as this wealthy, connected businessman. Under the guise of just being super generous and concerned for the soldiers standing out in the hot sun, he suggested planting eucalyptus trees near their outposts to provide some shade. Sounds like an incredibly kind gesture, right? But those trees secretly served as exact, immovable visual markers. Months later, the military simply targeted the eucalyptus trees, taking out the outposts with stunning precision.
Moving right along to Section 3, education as an engine.
Because survival isn't just about defense, you have to build an economy. And there's a stark contrast here in how they did it. Many nations, India included, often rely heavily on rote learning engineering. Students are basically chasing marks to get mass recruited by service companies. But they aren't always building tangible, world-changing skills. This nation, however, implemented strict problem-solving engineering. Their system evaluates students on their ability to solve existential national problems. You don't just get a degree. You are expected to build a product that solves water scarcity, or secures the borders, or fixes a real medical crisis.
And by focusing intensely on those local hardships, they ended up birthing global industries. Simca Bloss wanted to solve local water shortages, right? So he invented modern drip irrigation, which uses 60% less water. And boom, he created a massive global industry. A scientist trying to diagnose chronic stomach pain invented the pill cam, which is now used in medical diagnostics all over the world. They built the Iron Dome, one of the most advanced air defense systems on Earth. They even developed Mobileye, the underlying brain for self-driving cars, which Intel ended up acquiring for an earth-shattering $15.3 billion.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, the Yozma Fund masterstroke.
So in 1990, the collapse of the Soviet Union created this absolutely unprecedented opportunity. 1 million highly skilled immigrants, we're talking world-class scientists, top-tier mathematicians, engineers, migrated to the country. This instantly boosted the nation's population by 20%. Suddenly, they are sitting on the most educated workforce on the planet. But they had a massive problem. Constant regional tensions absolutely terrified foreign investors. No one wanted to put their money into a perceived conflict zone, no matter how brilliant the engineers were.
To attract that super timid capital, the government opened a $100 million fund in 1993 called Yozma, which literally means initiative. They went to foreign venture capitalists with an offer that was just too sweet to refuse. The deal was simple. You bring 60% of the funding for a local startup, and the government will match you with the remaining 40%.
Now, the mechanics of this were structured in 3 steps. Step 1 is that 60-40 setup we just talked about. Step 2 is the safety net. If the startup completely fails, both the investor and the government just absorb the loss together. But Step 3, this is the critical detail. If the company becomes a massive success, the foreign investor has the right to buy out the government's 40% share at the original initial price after 5 years. The government effectively absorbed the massive early-stage risk, but let the foreign investors keep nearly all of the long-term exponential upside.
This one mechanism completely shifted global investor behavior. Top venture capitalists from America, Europe, Japan, they all flooded in. Over 160 startups got funding through Yozma. This single policy transformed the country into the startup nation pretty much overnight. Companies like Biosense absolutely exploded in value and were acquired by giants like Johnson & Johnson for $500 million. They figured out exactly how to monetize their incredible human capital.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 5, Crucial Lessons for India. So what are the crucial takeaways for us today? It really centers on 3 main principles. First, power commands respect. Geopolitics doesn't run on friendships. It respects strength. Nations have to prioritize becoming independently, technologically, and economically powerful first. Second, human capital is supreme. Having a massive population of 1.4 billion people is honestly useless if you don't aggressively invest in turning them into world-class problem solvers. And third, the shift to inventions. India has a vast pool of engineering talent, but as long as we're just fulfilling basic service tasks for foreign companies, we won't have real global leverage. True leverage comes from owning the engineering and creating original, globally needed technologies.
As we close out this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought. We already possess the massive population, and we absolutely have the raw engineering talent. But talent alone doesn't shift the global balance. Knowing that the world runs on leverage, what exact, uncompromising steps do we need to take today to transition from just fulfilling the world's basic service tasks to actually inventing the technologies that the world relies on? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.